Rev up your engines!
Well, General Motors is laying off workers at their Toledo transmission plant, and this has nothing to do with chips or anything like that supply chain. Basically, as anybody can tell, they're moving a lot of their manufacturing out of the country, and they're just trying to do it on the sly. Here's their excuse. They want to align production with demand in regard to the 6-speed rear-wheel drive transmission. Align production with demand. Okay, you know what that means? They're going to be making the stuff in China instead, or Mexico. They're always trying to look for excuses. I remember years ago, another American company, Optima Batteries, they made really good batteries a long time ago. And they made them in the United States, and then they started making them in Mexico, and they said, don't worry, you're not going to use your jobs in the United States. The Mexican factory's just for the world demand. We're still making them in the United States here for us. Guess what? They're all made in Mexico now. Don't listen to the BS that these companies try to throw out in their PR that, oh, you know, they're aligning production with blah, blah. No, they just want to make them someplace else and lay the American workers off. Put this Buy American thing all up there. It's just a bunch of hoo-ha. What they built there was a 6-speed automatic transmission. A very good transmission that was quite reliable. As usual, follow the money. They want to make something that it's cheaper to make somewhere else than sell it at an outrageous price. Close down the factories in Ohio. All I got to say is follow the money when it comes to all that stuff. Don't listen to their, we're trying to make demand meet production. Bunch of nonsense. Like GM and Buick, they sold hundreds of thousands of them in China, and they're made in China. So you have to follow the money with this stuff. And they're laying off more people in Ohio, get rid of their jobs. Maybe they'll change their name to the Chinese company after a while. Who knows? None of them are doing all that well, really, financially, other than the smoke and mirrors they show you with their stock reports, and they hide this, that, and everything else. Hey, they're not doing all that well. It's kind of obvious. Well, here we go with Ford and more recalls. The F-150 recall. The federal government is telling their super cab owners to park their trucks because of seatbelt problems. They're advising that some 2021 Ford F-150s park the truck because the seatbelts have to be fixed. Turns out they incorrectly routed the seatbelt webbing on 16,430 of the super cabs. How they know it's that many is beyond me, but now it turns out that they might not hold you tight. They're there and they look okay, but they're not going to work. Now the notices aren't going to come out till September 27th, so if I were you, I would get my VIN number if you own one of those 2021 F-150 super cabs, and I would go to the National Highway Traffic Safety Association.org website, put in my VIN number and see whether that's included or not. Now it could be either the passenger or the driver's front seat belts that might fail. So the feds are advising you not to drive your truck until it's fixed. Because if it didn't hold, boom. So they're going to, when they recall them, they're going to check them, and if they look bad, I guess then they're going to replace them. Now this is the 5th recall for 2021 Ford F-150s. Chip shortage, coronavirus, them not building them right. They're in a lot of trouble. If you remember, I'll give you a little recap. Some of these recalls, one was for incorrectly assembled 2-piece drive shafts, leaking brake boosters, internally damaged steering gears, and poorly bonded windshields that might fly out during a crash. There's been the pandemic, all that stuff. But they did sell 787,422 F-150s during the pandemic. Obviously, they were not building them correctly. I don't know. Some of that stuff where they were taking white-collar workers and putting them on the assembly line. If you do own one of those, don't go over 20 miles an hour or something, so you won't really need the seatbelt all that much. Fair Guy 2 says, you've been around long enough to be familiar with Corvettes. What's your opinion? Well, they were an interesting design. You know, it was an air-cooled 6-cylinder engine. So it was kind of copying the idea of the Porsche 6-cylinder engine, like in the 911s, right? But it was old technology. It had carburetors and stuff on it. Ralph Nader called them unsafe at any speed because if the tires were too far off, they'd flip over. Some of that was overblown. They were, for their size, cheap little car, relatively quick if you had a standard transmission because they had an air-cooled engine in the back, drove the rear, and they were kind of fun to drive around. Now, ultimately, they were a massive failure, but now they're coming back as kind of an antique collector's item. There's a guy in Pennsylvania that's got a place where he gets all new parts that he makes and buys old stock parts and sells stuff. So if you're thinking about collecting one, you can get parts from this guy, the door panels, you name it. They got all kinds of stuff there if you're interested in it. And they're not really expensive collectibles. They're never going to be worth a ton of money because they're just a kind of an oddball car. They were an interesting saga of American car manufacturing, but Americans never were that big on air-cooled engines. That really wasn't an American thing. They're kind of making a cheap copy of a Porsche. Ultimately, they kind of failed. The quality was nothing compared to the drivability and the handling, the acceleration that the Porsches had. So they're kind of a fadeaway thing there. But some guys like them, and that guy in Pennsylvania has a lot of parts for him. Ag 40062 says, I got a 97 Camry, it's leaking fuel. I just bought it, 197,000 miles, it looks good, I'm in Hawaii. There is a part that's leaking. Now he has a picture. And what it is a fuel line that has the plastic snap-ons, and it's a plastic or nylon, same thing, line, about this big. You can't fix those things. There are kits out there, I don't trust them. You got nylon and plastic. You try to put splice clamps, it's going to break, it's going to crack. If it's leaking now, it's probably because it's cracked already, and it means that it's all brittle. It's going to leak someplace else. You got to buy that part. I know you're in Hawaii. It's hard to get auto parts there. See if you can get one flown in. You're closer to Japan than you are to the United States. You might order something from Japan. The Japanese are always going back and forth to Hawaii, and I'm sure air freight wouldn't be that bad to have it flown in from Japan, because you can't fix those plastic nylon stuff. It's just not worth it. It's too dangerous. You can't do that with a plastic nylon. It would squeeze nylon plastic and crack it. You can't fix them. You gotta replace them. Sploot said, I got a 2002 Honda Accord. The transmission hesitates when I'm accelerating from a stop. It might take a few seconds and then it'll take off. One time I accelerated, the revs went to 6,000, but the car wouldn't move. Then I switched to D3 and it drove as usual. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but unless you're low on fluid, your transmission's starting to go out. It revs that high and driving, it won't go anywhere. Your transmission is going out internally. Now, when you put it in D3, if you're doing it manually, you're bypassing a lot of stuff. To really rebuild a tranny on that Accord, you're looking at $3,500 up. They're very complex, very expensive to rebuild. Check the fluid. If you can put it in D3 and drive it that way, shift it manually. Odds are that year, 2002, they were relatively weak, 187,000 miles. Yeah, on an 02, that's often the limit, and you're going to have to either shift it manually or have it rebuilt, which is going to cost a fortune. If you aren't low on fluid, pray you're just low on fluid. Have the fluid checked. Maybe it just needs fluid. It's a Honda. They generally don't leak. If you look under there and it's bone dry, odds are it's full and it's just worn out. BDJ53 says, Scotty, what do you think of GM's 3-cylinder engine and a new Trailblazer and Buick Encore? I don't like the idea that you get a pretty big vehicle like that and put a 3-cylinder engine in. Yeah, they're all into this gas mileage and they turbocharge them in GDI, those 3 cylinders, to put out horsepower. What you going to lose? Longevity. And also, they rate them for high gas mileage, right? So you're towing stuff, pulling stuff, you're going to get horrible gas mileage with a 3-cylinder engine. It's not made for pulling all that weight. It's more a gimmick than anything else. And yeah, you get better gas mileage, they got power, but the turbochargers are in them. They're going to break. They're going to cost you a fortune. It's not like you're buying a Toyota or a Honda, and hey, the engines could last a long time. And Hondas, they've had turbos for quite some time in their cars, right? You know, I've never seen a turbocharger break in a Honda, but I see them break all the time in GMs and Fords and Chryslers. I mean, you're buying that kind of lack of quality, I certainly wouldn't want a 3-cylinder engine in one. Is it okay to pass wind with the windows rolled up? Well, it depends. If you're the only one in the car, go right ahead. You know what they say about people who like the smell of their own stuff, so that's okay. But if there's people in there, I would not do that. I had a friend ages ago up north. He had a Ford Econoline van. He had even had a waterbed in the back of the thing. And what he would do when he's going down the road in the winter, he'd just open the door out when he was doing it. He opened the door, it all got sucked out on his side, and then he'd close the door. Be polite when you're driving a car. Unless you're the only one in there, then do whatever you want. It's your own business. Amin says, were the old Peugeots reliable in the USA like the Peugeot 405? The cars were actually well made and pretty reliable cars. The problem is, when they did break, they had no repair infrastructure, and the parts cost a fortune. I worked on them when I was a young mechanic. I worked on a few of them. But I always had a hard time getting parts and getting information on how to repair them. Now, I know people in England that swear by them and people in France that swear by them. And if a guy in England swears by a French car, they tell you they must be pretty well made. They don't particularly like the French. He had bought 5 of them his entire lifetime. When one finally wore out, he bought another one. He bought the diesels. He liked the diesel engine. There's nothing wrong with them. In the United States, though, there was no infrastructure and they failed miserably. They didn't sell that many of them. I think they sold less than 100,000 of them or something in the whole run of whenever they sold them for how many years. Booyah says, is it a good idea to get massage covers instead of replacing the seats? Sure, why not? There are so many different ones out there. I personally, in my Matrix, when I drive to Rhode Island, I got this great back saver. It was designed by an orthopedic surgeon that just fits there, and it's cool. It's black, and then it fades down by the back by your lumbar, and I never get a sore back anymore. I could drive for 10 hours. My back doesn't get sore. My neck doesn't get sore. So they're actually better than some of the seats you're going to get. There's nothing wrong with them if you buy the right one that fits correctly. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.